Peter Falk, Alan Arkin, a very reluctant spy, a crazy dictator, stolen treasury engraving plates, a scene that likely inspired a scene in License to Kill, a wedding, and two very large wedding gifts are some of the things we'll discuss from the 1979 comedy spy movie, The In-Laws. Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
From SpyMovieNavigator.com and our podcast show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Join us as we decode the 1979 movie, The In-Laws. We'll also include a little bit on the 2003 remake, but the focus here will be on the 1979 original movie.
Now, this is a movie I haven't seen for years, yet it's one of my favorite comedies, mainly because of the serpentine scene we'll talk about later. But in our most recent spy movie news, we noted the passing of Art Evans, who was driving the Treasury armored truck in the opening of The In-Laws. And that prompted us to rewatch the movie and put this episode together for you. So, Dan, My first question, is The In-Laws a spy movie?
Well, yeah. I mean, Peter Falk, who here is one of the stars in this movie, he's a CIA agent and he's on a mission. At least we think so. I mean, that fits the definition for me. I think it's much more of a spy movie than A Man on the Inside was in terms of that series. And we have Peter Falk, who I love in anything, and Alan Arkin. Come on, this is goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also think The In-Laws is one of the best comedy spy movies ever made. Now, we'll talk about the author who gave us this gem a little bit later, but I would also put probably the Austin Powers series ahead of this movie in my comedy spy movie list, but not much else. I mean, I like this even better than The Man Who Knew Too Little.
Wow. All right. Well, let's talk about it. Okay. Let's look at the plot. So, given that this was a fairly popular movie and it's getting close to 50 years old already, holy gee, we will not be as no spoiler driven as we often are on these kind of movies. We're going to throw some stuff in there. We're going to assume that mostly you've seen this movie, you have some familiarity with it. So, The In-Laws starts with a heist of treasury printing plates, or master dies. I love this opening scene because you are just waiting to see what happens next, and this is a pre-title scene, which is cool.
You could print a lot of money if you got your hands on those things.
That's the whole concept, right? These plates are taken from the back of an armed treasury vehicle. After they are found, the robbers are throwing money all over the place in the back of this truck. And for a moment, we don't know what they're after. We're thinking, wait a minute, there's cash all over the place here. These are the plates that money is pressed from. So now this heist is similar to heists we've seen in dozens of other movies. A moving vehicle gets overtaken and the contents are stolen. Think of the scene in Mission Impossible 3 when they break into the van with that foam stuff. It's a bit different here, but the concept is similar. And we see the use of a powerful magnet to lift a security vehicle like we saw in You Only Live Twice in 1967, 12 years before this version of The In-Laws. And next we see the lead criminal from the heist deliver the plates to a guy in a black coat and a black hat. I love that scene because you think, okay, yeah, who's this gangster guy? Because that's the typical makeup of him with his outfit, right? The guy in the hat is Vince Ricardo, played by Peter Falk, and he gives the appearance of being a mobster. This scene is serious and doesn't hint that this is a comedy yet.
Yeah, I love the way they open it up that way, where you don't know it's a comedy.
Yeah.
Then we hear Vince say his son is getting married that weekend, so coming up with the money for the plates would be impossible in 24 hours. He couldn't pay these guys off for the plates that quickly because he's got this wedding coming up. And that sets up one big conflict. Someone isn't going to be happy about a delay in payment.
That's right. Now, his son, who is getting married, is named Tommy, and he's played by Michael Lembeck. Neither Tommy nor the woman he is to marry gets much airtime in this 1979 original movie. Lembeck is a director as well as an actor. He directed 24 episodes of the TV show Friends, which I loved, and 32 episodes of the Croft Super Show. Now, one fun fact about Lembeck is he was in a drama class in high school, and one of the other students was Albert Brooks, who starred in the In-Laws remake in 2003. What a crazy industry.
Oh, that is a good bit of information there.
Yeah,
now,
that's cool.
The tone changes quickly as the movie cuts to a scene inside of Sheldon Cornpett's dental office.
Great character.
Yeah, Sheldon is played exquisitely by Alan Arkin, probably my favorite Alan Arkin movie.
He's
And
great.
during this scene, Sheldon's wife, Carol, played by Nancy Dussault, calls him, and we find out that his daughter, Barbara, is getting married.
Hmm. Okay. Barbara is played by Penny Peiser. This is funny because in the 2003 remake, the Cornpet family name was changed to Peiser.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool because it's like they took this character who had a role in the movie, but not a huge role, and they made her last name be
Yeah.
the last name in the remake. That was kind of cool.
It's crazy when they do that kind of stuff. All right.
So it looks like the son of a mobster, Vince Ricardo's son Tommy, is going to marry a dentist's daughter.
That's what it looks like. All right. With what we find out about Vince a little bit later in the movie, this sounds a lot like the movie Meet the Parents from 2000 that then led to Meet the Fockers. Well, it has that feel, at least at this point.
I mean, the in-laws had to have a huge impact on Meet the Parents.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so then that night, after we established that both Vince and Sheldon's kids are going to get married, Vince Ricardo is going to go to the Corn Pets for dinner with his son Tommy and his wife, who's played by Arlene Golanka. Now, this is a funny and extremely important scene for the plot. When you look online for information about classic scenes from this movie, this dinner scene is always mentioned. It's a master class on how to show awkwardness, zaniness, how people act when they're trying to show family unity.
Yeah.
And also, an important non comedic thing happens during the scene. Vince purposefully leaves something behind in the Corn Pet's basement.
Yeah, this dinner scene is one of the best. I mean, you hear Vince, who travels internationally all the time. No one knows exactly what for.
Oh, he's an
He's
international consultant, Dan.
he's an international consultant. He tells these fantastic stories at the table, things he has seen in his travels, like huge flies carrying off babies and the guacamole act. It still makes me laugh. And
Yeah.
Peter Falk, he's absolutely perfect here. Tremendous delivery and tremendous facial expressions. They had never met before, the parents, because Vince was supposed to be this, like you said, this international consultant, and he's always out of town. The Ricardos were late, even tonight, for this dinner, and Vince told these very tall tales at the dinner. Vince mentions names like General Jesus Braunschweiger, which Jesus Braunschweiger, that's a great combo anyway, all making both the stories and Vince sound unbelievable. So this scene increases the animosity that Sheldon has for Vince because, again, they had never met. All that, he's upset with him in the beginning. Now they're late for dinner, and now all these crazy stories. And you can tell he just thinks Vince is crazy. And here, the first meeting. And Sheldon's daughter is marrying into this nutcase family. This is what he's thinking.
Yeah, he really didn't want that. But the interesting thing is, we later do meet General Braunschweiger briefly. So
Yes.
it makes us wonder how much of what Vince was saying at that table was real and how much was made up.
Yeah.
I got to find those big flies that could carry kids away now. We have to
Yeah.
keep watching to find out.
Yeah, I love how they drop these little pieces in on us, which is great. So the tension gets ramped up in this dinner scene. It's a very important scene in the movie and really one of the best in the entire movie.
Yeah, I agree. And without what Vince did in the basement, we wouldn't have had the rest of the movie. And it also set up a double pursuit, which is something we've talked about in many spy movies when we've talked about the 39 Steps, North by
Yeah.
Northwest, pretty much all of the Mission Impossible movies, Bourne movies, and many of the James Bond movies.
Yeah. We move on to the next day, and Vince needs to get a bag from the safe in his office. All right. But as the cab gets closer to the office, he notices some henchmen waiting for him at the entrance to the building. And he ends up going to Sheldon's dental office. This is a great scene, too. He thinks that Sheldon will get past the henchman because he has a dentist uniform on and he's not Vince, who they might know. This was a good one.
It really was. Now, I got to jump in here because you mentioned the cab. And so during the whole scene with Vince and the cab, it's the same driver throughout.
Yes.
I mean, he drives them very crazily. He waits with Vince in a bar while Sheldon goes to get the bag. And the first time you see him, you see the back of his head. And when he talked, I immediately went like, hey, that's David Paymer.
Yeah.
Right? I picked up that voice because I really like him as an actor. And it ended up, I was right when we finally saw his face. This was Paymer's first movie, and he had a decent sized supporting role here. It's not long through the movie, but he's in that scene a lot. And I love the role he plays. And I thought he did a good job as a cab driver here.
Oh, he did.
He was nominated for Best Acting in a Supporting Role Oscar for the movie Mr. Saturday Night. And again, I just wanted to call it out because I really like this guy's acting, and he's not in a lot of the movie, but it's really fun when he's in it.
Yeah, he had a good part in this funny bit. It was good. Of course, this is all happening in New York. So, driving crazy, a cab driving crazy in New York, it's not anything unusual. All right.
Shock me.
All right. Now, this is when the crazy stuff starts happening. Yeah, even crazier. It's almost a controlled chaos that continues to escalate up until the end of the movie. Vince tells one lie after another to Sheldon as the chaos escalates. The situation gets crazier and crazier.
Now, some might say absurd, Dan.
Yeah. It's just full of wacky stuff. It's great.
It is. All right. So I think we have the plot somewhat set up here. We've got the stuff that Sheldon had to get out of the safe. How he got that out of the safe was a funny scene. But I don't know if we want to go too much more in depth to the plot here. I don't want to go through scene by scene.
No.
I think we can just say bad people want to use these currency printing plates to bring down the world. Think of Goldfinger's attempt to bring up the value of gold. Now imagine if you could print money in a bunch of currencies. Inflation would go sky high and you'd win.
Yeah. At one point, Vince, Peter Falk, says, I don't know what people are going to do when a six-pack of Budweiser costs $1,200. It's like, okay, now we know what this is all about.
Costs $1,200. That's inflation for you.
Yeah. All right. But I think we can point out here that, like James Bond in License to Kill, the movie heads to Central America for a big part of the adventure. And that's, of course, where we meet General Braunschweiger. And that's where he is. And it's a decent amount of time spent in Central America. And remember, this is 10 years before License to Kill. More later on that.
Yeah, where did they come up with that idea? Okay, Dan, so let's shift gears and decode what makes this such a great comedy spy movie. We've got this setup. We know what the setup is. We talk about the comedy in here. So let's talk about why it ends up being a great comedy spy movie.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you got to say Peter Falk and Alan Arkin are just absolutely excellent in this movie. Their acting is tremendous. The characters are an odd couple, and this movie would not have worked if you didn't have that great acting for these two lead roles. Perfect. They had to have a chemistry on screen, and they do. At one point, Sheldon says to someone that Vince is crazy, but there's something about him that's likable, or something like that, he says. That statement permeates the entire movie, and the on-screen chemistry between the two of them is just fantastic.
Yeah, I actually think it's much more than what we got out of Michael Douglas and Albert Brooks in the 2003 remake.
Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about that. And I don't know. We'll see. All right, now, there are other spy movies where an odd couple works. Think of Central Intelligence, which we just decoded last year. The 2008 movie Get Smart, and the 2013 movie The Heat. And there's a couple more examples. I think we see this odd couple thing more in police movies, but it also works for spy movies as well. I also think the character of General Garcia, played brilliantly by Richard Libertini.
Oh, he was great.
Yeah, he was fantastic, right? And as we said, the movie gets crazy, and Libertini had to nail this role, and he does. The character belongs in a loony bin, not running a small country. So the role and the acting of this character, both were great.
Libertini was fantastic in this. And we often talk about having a great villain is important for a spy movie. Well, we have one here, especially since it's a comedy spy movie. He's a great comedy spy villain. Now, there was something when I saw General Garcia here, he does something that made me think of the ventriloquist, Senior Wentworth. It helps the viewer to see just how nuts this guy is. Now, if you don't know who Senior Wentworth was, he was a ventriloquist who had his heyday in the mid-1930s. He then had a resurgence due to appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show, Late Night with David Letterman, and even an episode of The Muppet Show. Garcia was doing this thing with his hand where he was kind of like doing a hand puppet. Well, that's exactly what Senior Wentworth did. And so his technique for the mouth of his dummy, Johnny, is exactly what Garcia does, and it makes the general look bat guano crazy.
Yeah, the voice Garcia does with this hand puppet. I mean, that's spot on. And his lips are moving the whole time, too. So not much.
Yeah, you're looking at it, and they're looking at him going like, this guy's nuts.
Yeah. All right. Another thing that made this movie so good was the script. The In-Laws was written by Andrew Bergman. His dialogue and the way he ramps up the comedy, the chaos, and tension is excellent. So the flow of the movie works, the craziness of the movie works, and the story works. And it also has some great lines.
Yeah, I thought the dialogue was great here. And I mean, there were some really great lines in here. I mean, these are the best security men in the world. They used to work for J.C. Penney. Or
It's
you
good.
were involved in the Bay of Pigs? Involved? That was my idea.
Yeah, that's good. And there's a bunch of other ones. And Vince, during one of the chase-ins, says, I'm such a great driver. It's incomprehensible they took my license away. It's like, and Sheldon had some other great lines like, no reason to shoot at me. I'm a dentist. Or another one, he says, oh, God, don't let me die on West 31st Street.
Yeah, and
That's
another
good.
one here is we have no blindfolds, senor. We are a poor country. You don't have blindfolds. You
Yeah,
can't
that's
afford a
good.
blindfold. And then Sheldon has this line where he says, I've only had 4 women in my life, 2 of them my wife. And that was funny because he said something about it being once before and once after, implying that they only did it twice, once before the wedding and once after the wedding. And that gave them Barbara.
Yeah, there's a whole bit with pea soup too. It's a
Oh
great
yeah,
moment. Peter Falk as Vince
they're
delivers
they're
some
in a
great lines
cafeteria
there.
talking about pea soup. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great scene. And when Sheldon asks about being a CIA agent,
He
what
says,
does Vince say?
are you interested in
What's
joining?
that?
The benefits are terrific. The trick is not to get killed. That's really the key to the benefit program. I love that. The trick is not to get killed. Yeah.
That's the key to the benefit program.
And then
That's
even when
uh,
what was the when Vince was talking about the giant tsetse flies, what was he had a great line there too.
yeah. These flies, for example, he says they're protected against pilferage under the provisions of the Guacamole
That
Act of
was it.
1917. The Guacamole Act of 1917. If we didn't find out General Braunschweiger was a real guy, we wouldn't believe this one. So, now you're thinking, And of course, the Serpentine Shelley Serpentine bit.
That line makes me laugh every time I hear it. It is one of my favorite comedy movie lines. Forget spy movies, comedy movie lines ever. And the way that made
Yeah.
that work was Arkin's acting in it. But through all of this, we're
Yeah.
talking about these lines. There was one line I was listening for that wasn't there. I was just dying to hear Vince say, just one more thing. I mean, because
Like
because of
Columbo.
Columbo, Falk playing Columbo, I thought it would
Okay.
there would have been a chance for them, given some of the other stuff they were saying, for them to slip one of those in, but they didn't. Columbo's my all-time favorite TV show.
Yeah.
I had hopes, but they were dashed.
Yeah. But on the Serpentine scene, too, I love it because Vince pronounces it serpentine, like turpentine, when it's really serpentine. And near the end, when Sheldon gives his daughter an envelope with a lot of money in it, like $1 million or whatever, she asks him, this is all from root canals? Because he's a dentist. And Sheldon, Alan Arkin, casually says, and lectures. I like, you got $1 million from root canals and
Today's
lectures.
politicians do that. That's no problem. You can make that kind of money.
Yeah.
And you have to like, for a wedding present, the dad giving her $1 million in an envelope. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice gift. The other thing I really loved is that Vince at different times calls Sheldon Shell and sometimes Shelly. I mean, this is really funny when you hear it in relationship
Oh
to
yeah,
the situations they're in. Hey, Shell,
and he
hey,
never gets
Shelly.
permission to do it. He just says it, right?
Yeah, right. It's good. So most of this clever dialogue was scripted, and you got to credit the writers for this. Bergman's first screenplay was done with Mel Brooks and Norman Steinberg. It was Blazing Saddles, which is another movie with a lot
Oh yeah,
of
I
absurd
actually think that
comedy.
may be the funniest movie I've ever seen. But today they couldn't get away with about 90% of the comedy, right? Because they
Yeah,
just
they
wouldn't
wouldn't do
try
it.
it. Now I must like Bergman's writing because 3 of my top comedies were written by him. You got Blazing Saddles, The In-Law, and just like Blazing Saddles, The In-Laws has some jokes that are cringeworthy today, especially around some Chinese characters. Now this
Yeah,
not as
not
bad,
as
but the
bad.
lead guy on the Chinese team was James Hong. And this guy's got almost 500
Yeah,
credits in IMDb. You've seen him before. It seems like if a show needed
yeah,
an Asian male comedic actor, James was their man. He's funny, and in
yeah.
this really cringeworthy scene, he gives this flight attendant speech. You know how when you take off and you have the flight attendants go through the safety speech, and he
Yeah,
did that ad libbed, and
that's
I
good.
believe it was Chinese. Yeah, he's
And he's
doing it
doing
to
it to
Sheldon,
Sheldon.
who doesn't understand a word Chinese. But I believe it was Chinese. I can't say for sure because I don't speak the language. But
Yeah,
you could follow
we
along
don't know.
with it if you've flown a lot without even understanding the words he was saying. I mean, it was really funny.
Yeah. And then you get back to Bergman. Bergman wrote a lot of the big comedy movies. Oh God, You Devil, Fletch, The Freshman, which he also directed, Soap Dish, and a lot more. His writing on the in-laws showcases how good of a comedic author he is. And if you take Andrew Bergman's screenplay and put it in the hands of director Arthur Hiller, who directed this movie, you have a chance for a successful, very successful movie. And it worked. Hiller is probably best known for directing the movie Love Story, for which he was nominated for an Oscar for Best Director in 1971. But he also directed the comedies Poppy, also starring Alan Arkin, Plaza Suite, and Silver Streak before
I
the
loved
in-laws.
Silver Streak.
So,
I mean, what a
Silver
great
Streak.
comedy. It
Silver
had a
Streak was
bunch of wacky stuff in it too. So you can see how Hiller's directing evolved with these comedies as you go through this list of comedies.
yeah, and plus Richard Kiel was
Oh,
one of the
that's
henchmen in
right.
Silver Streak. So there.
He played Jaws in two of the Bond movies. I totally forgot he was in Silver Streak.
Yeah. Now, Arkin in an interview said 99.9% of the dialogue was the written dialogue, which again, kudos to the writers. But when they were filming the chase scene where Vince keeps making these U-turns, Arkin said he and Falk were just kind of sitting there while they were doing something else. And Falk started talking about a great chicken sandwich that he had had. And Arkin said, wait a minute. That has to be your line during the chase. You tell about a place here that has a great chicken sandwich. And they
And
did.
it
They
was
put that
funny.
in there. And that was it was funny. It was a great spot for it too. All right. Another reason this movie is so well regarded is that it has some memorable scenes. Of course, you have the
Serpentine,
serpentine
Shelley.
scene.
Serpentine.
Yeah, right. Oh my God. The dinner scene we mentioned earlier, a crazy car chase. The scene in the cafeteria
That
where
was the pea
Sheldon
soup.
loses
That
it.
was the pea
The
soup.
sequence, yeah, the sequence with General Garcia and a firing line, man, and the way that Sheldon and Vince make it to the wedding. We'll talk about that in a second. Just some classic, very well-known
Yeah. And
scenes.
as we're
Great
talking about the
stuff.
serpentine scene, as I said, it's one of my favorite comedy scenes in any movie. And it's just not the lines, because there's not a lot of lines there. But the way
No,
the
no,
scene
not a
was
lot of lines.
blocked and Alan Arkin's acting in it. I mean, they're being shot at and we're laughing our butts off, right? This should not be a comedic scene, but it is hilarious.
Arkin in that serpentine scene is magnificent. His innocence and naivete of the situation is remarkably portrayed. But as we normally see in spy movies, none of the bad guys ever hit
Tell
anything.
that to General Braunschweiger.
Oh yeah, yeah. Poor general. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that car chase where Vince starts driving in circles, that makes me laugh every time. And there's a
Yeah.
car chase that ends up with a car crashing into the fruit market. And we see that a couple of times in
Mhm.
James Bond movies, most notably Skyfall. And there's a similar scene in The Living Daylights.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and we mentioned the firing squad. This should be a much more tense scene than it is, but the dialogue and the acting just make it
Well,
extremely funny. And Peter Falk delivers a little speech there that's hilarious. That's what you got?
yeah, that should have been
Trying to
that
save
should have
them.
been a dark scene, and it wasn't. Okay, now it's time for our second reference into how this movie influenced the James Bond movie License to Kill. We mentioned how the movie moves to Central America, but the way that Sheldon and Vince arrive at the wedding at the end of the in-laws had
Oh,
to
yeah.
influence License to Kill. By the way James Bond and Felix Leiter arrive at Felix's wedding in the pre-title sequence of License to Kill has a big similarity to
Yeah.
what we get in the in-laws. Yes, it is different, but the concept is extremely close.
Down to the very hats they were wearing, really. I mean, no doubt it influenced License to Kill. Yeah, come on. All right, that brings us to our final reason that The In-Laws is such a great movie. it has stood the test of time. Other than the Chinese cringy dialogue, and really, it's not all horrible. This movie holds up pretty well for over 45 years that it's been around. So well that they did a remake of it in 2003.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the themes of the movie that of the original movie that we see come through. And the first theme here is that very different character types can end up building a strong relationship.
Mhm.
Vince comes off as this crazy CIA agent, and Sheldon is about as button up a person as you can find.
Yeah.
Yet it somehow works, like The Odd Couple
Yeah.
or Caldwell and Muldoon, who are Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, if you don't remember their names, from Silver Streaks.
Yeah.
From Silver Streak, the movie Hiller directed before this one. To me, it's a bit Odd Couple meets Alex Lemus.
Yeah, I think another theme is the playoff between chaos and order. And it's constantly doing that, right? The whole movie, it's constantly bouncing between one and the other. Vince's life is all about chaos as the CIA agent. He never knows where he has to go. Sheldon lives a very orderly life. His wife tells the police that Sheldon always walks through the door at 7 o'clock every evening. Plus, we have Vince delivering the chaotic situations, playing against the again buttoned up Sheldon constantly. And it's Alan Arkin's acting in these chaotic situations that makes it so hilarious. I mean, it just puts his button up way smack dab against Vince's craziness.
Well, Vince is kind of a straight man, right? So it's kind of interesting how he's kind of leading it, but he's really the straight man.
Yeah.
And Alan Arkin, who you would think would have been the straight man, is the one who does all the crazy stuff.
Yeah. Arkin does some crazy stuff in this movie, but he plays it off so well. Again, his face is terrific in this. All right.
Yeah. So another theme is around trust and deception. Yeah. Vince tells us a lot of crazy stories, often outright lying to Sheldon. And Sheldon's there trying to figure out what can I trust? What do I just go along with? And what should I resist?
Mm-hmm.
And it's woven throughout the whole movie. And at the end of the movie, Sheldon finally figures out that deception can be useful when a CIA guy called Lutz shows up. And it wasn't until they were halfway through the conversation with Lutz that Sheldon realized that deception could work.
Yeah. And along those lines is the emphasis on family and loyalty. That's woven really throughout this whole movie, too. These guys are very loyal to their families. Everything from Sheldon's wanting to stop the wedding after the dinner scene because he thinks Vince is nuts, to what they each give their child as a wedding gift. And during the dinner scene, Vince blows up at his son because Vince thinks his son is being disloyal. So there's a lot of this family loyalty stuff here. Family is important.
Right. So we've talked about the good stuff. What didn't work in the 1979 version? What areas of criticism were there for it?
Now, there's some critics that thought the plot was too simple, predictable, and just played on the odd couple concept. Now, I don't agree with that, because this is a plot changed all the time as the situations changed in the movie here. So no, I don't go with that one.
But yeah, it's funny because when I was reading about these things, I read that and I'm like, I don't think the plot's simple at all. And yes, they're definitely playing on the odd couple, but there's some huge twists to the way they do this. Yeah. And another thing we've seen from the critics of this movie is that the absurdity just takes things too far. Some people say that it's such an unbelievable plot that it detracted from their enjoyment. But for me, I actually think that's what makes it work.
That's the funny part.
The crazier it got, the funnier it became for me, and the more fun it became for me.
Yeah, I agree there. That's ridiculous. Of course, some people thought, here's something. The pacing of the movie was off.
Wait, somebody didn't like a pacing of a movie? We get that every movie.
Every time. Every critic's got an issue about pacing, no matter what the movie is just about, I think. So I'm not sure I agree with this one either. I thought the pacing was actually pretty good. Now, I remember Siskel and Ebert when they reviewed this movie, and Siskel did not like it, and Ebert did. But Siskel said something key. If you are laughing at this movie and the scenes and so on, then that's all you need to know for you. It works, basically, for you. And I personally laughed out loud a few times here. So I thought it was a great line by Siskel because, hey, if Ebert is laughing at this movie, hey, I'm not going to disagree with you that you enjoyed the movie.
And I enjoyed the movie, and I laughed.
Yeah. All right. We've mentioned some places where we think the in-laws influenced other movies or was influenced by other movies. One that we haven't mentioned is The Reluctant Spy. We talked about that in many of our episodes. We kind of mentioned it earlier, actually. It's a very common theme for spy movies. And here, Sheldon is about as reluctant to spy as we'll ever find. We see the reluctant spy all the way back to the 39 Steps, North by Northwest, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and a slew of other movies, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one is when Sheldon calls the CIA and talks to Lutz, who's played by Ed Begley Jr.
Yeah, he was
Now,
good.
he's told that Vince is no longer with the CIA. He's been kicked out as a mental case. I mean, because they can't tell Sheldon the truth because they don't know who this guy is, right? They got somebody
Yeah.
calling him. So
And
they
we
tell
don't know exactly what the truth is here either in the movie, right? At
well,
this point.
that's true. At this point, we don't.
Yeah.
So they tell Sheldon that Vince has been disavowed and become a mental case. We see disavowing happen a lot, or at least the conversation about being disavowed in many spy movies.
Yeah, and he might be a rogue agent.
He could be a rogue agent. That's
Yeah.
true.
All right, let's shift gears here and point out a couple of fun facts about this movie that I want to quickly get into here before we talk briefly about the 2003 remake of The In-Laws. First, the bank teller in the movie was played by Barbara Dana. She was married to Alan Arkin at the time they filmed this, and then it was a 35-year marriage. So it's kind of cool.
And our second fun fact, the orchestra director at the end was Carmen Dragon. Now, he was a well-known orchestral director, and I like it when they bring real people in for stuff like this because it's not an actor you're actually seeing a real director directing.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you know the duo Captain and Tennille,
Yeah.
Captain's last name was Dragon. This was his father.
Yeah. Hey, cool. That is cool. All right. So we like the 1979 version of The In-Laws very much. Now, let's take a look at the 2003 remake starring Michael Douglas and Albert Brooks. We won't go into everything here, but we want to give you our reactions and point out the differences and the critical reactions to it versus the original. Now, the 1979 version has an 89% tomato meter rating on RottenTomatoes.com. The 2003 version, it only got 33%. But remakes are tough sometimes.
Do we really have to look at this remake?
Yeah.
I usually hate remakes, and this one is no exception. I don't know if I would have felt different if it was the only version of the story done or that I had seen.
Yeah.
You know, normally when we do these episodes, I watch a movie at least twice, usually 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could only watch this one once.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, they did make it, so we're going to look at it. So there you go.
Okay. Now, I just don't know why they do remakes, though. What compels them? I mean, especially since they change a lot when they do. If you think about the remake of Hitchcock's Psycho, that was supposed to be a shot-for-shot redo, but they still change stuff. I mean, why do they have to mess with a classic?
Yeah, they always do too. And I generally do not like remakes. Like, I didn't like The Day the Earth Stood Still remake. I didn't like The Journey to the Center of the Earth remake either. There have been some good ones, like The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1934 versus the 1956 version, both directed by Hitchcock. Though in our one decoding session on both those movies, we did say that there were things in the 1934 version that we actually liked better. So it happens. And of course, there was a Thomas Crown Affair. That was another decent remake. So those were good.
I'll agree with you on The Man Who Knew Too Much, given that they were both done by Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And so it kind of felt okay as a remake. The Thomas Crown Affair is one where I like both movies, but they dramatically changed the heist. Why?
Yes.
I mean, that's the stuff they do in remakes that drives me nuts. And The In-Laws 2003 has this problem.
Well, they did that in The Day the Earth Stood Still and Journey to the Center of the Earth as well. They change it because they think, well, you already know the story, so we got to change something so you'll watch this movie. It's all about money. They're just like, hey, we'll make money. But the whole concept of remaking, and they do a lot of it now, is come up with some original ideas and stop doing remakes of classic movies that you're not going to do a better job at mostly. Stop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at what Disney's going through with all these live actions. Some of them are making money. Some of them, like Snow White, they take their first movie and they're screwing it up.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I'm jaded against these remakes. But when I saw the 2003 version of The In-Laws, I was jaded and biased against it because it was a remake, and I love the original.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that shaded my opinion because the original was so good. And I spent a lot of my time thinking, why'd they have to change this?
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear from someone who only saw the remake, the 2003 remake. Does that version work for you if that's the one you saw and you hadn't seen the original?
All right, now there's some key differences between the two movies, of course, because they have to do that. Let's start with the cast. The remake has a very strong cast. As we've mentioned, the lead characters are Steve Tobias, played by Michael Douglas, and Jerry Pazer, played by Albert Brooks. Now, the supporting cast included Ryan Reynolds, who played Jerry's son, Mark. Mark has a bigger role in this version than Tommy did in the original version. Steve, the CIA agent here, is divorced, and his ex-wife Judy is played by Candice Bergen. She's she's good.
Yeah. And then when you get on the Pacer side of things, the daughter Melissa is played by Lindsay Sloan, with Marisa Ricosa playing Jerry's wife, Catherine.
Yeah. Now, some other characters of note are Angela Harris, who is played by Robin Tunney. Now, this isn't a character that existed in the original version.
Yeah, but I've been talking about this being a remake and not liking them changing things. I actually like her character a lot. I thought she was great.
Yeah, and I like Ryan Reynolds. I mean, I think he's a solid actor. I loved him in The Proposal with Sandra Bullock, and he was very good here, I thought, too. Now, this version does have a good villain,
Oh
Jean
yeah.
Pierre Thibodeau. He was played by the wonderful actor David Suchet. It's a totally different setup than what we see in the original movie with General Garcia, but Thibodeau is a fun villain. Also, in Thibodeau's scenes, there are some gay comments that don't hold up all that well today, but they aren't over the top. But Thibodeau is a fun villain.
And I think it's great to see someone who is so entrenched in our mind as a character take on a totally different role than the one he or she is known for.
Yeah.
Peter Falk in the original. You think Columbo, he's not playing Columbo.
Yeah.
So that was good to see. Here in the remake, we get David Suchet, who's best known for Hercule Poirot. You don't think of Poirot when he comes onto the screen in this one.
No.
I mean, he was also like that in, if you ever saw The Last Innocent Man. David Suchet is a great actor. He's got the stereotype in your mind when you think David Suchet of Poirot, but he can do these other characters.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about this being a great cast, and I can't believe I'm going to say this because I think Albert Brooks was wrong for the role of Jerry. And I'm biased because I loved Alan Arkin's portrayal of this doctor kind of character, the guy who kind of loses it a little bit, the real button-up guy. And I normally like Brooks's work a lot. I mean, broadcast news, Defending Your Life, and of course, Lost in America. Classic performances, Albert Brooks at his best. But here, I just don't think he was the right actor for this role.
Wow.
He plays very low-key funny, and this part to me requires someone to go more over the top, and that's why I thought he was miscast. And I also didn't get the same chemistry between Jerry and Steve that I did with Vince and Sheldon. I do think that Michael Douglas was a great casting choice for Steve. To me, it was Albert Brooks, great actor, really good comedic actor, but I didn't think he was right for this part.
Wow. Okay. Really?
Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, actually, I enjoyed this 2003 version a lot. And I thought the exact opposite of what you just said. I thought Albert Brooks was actually very good in this role, and that Michael Douglas was just too slick in appearance and demeanor and predictability, really, and too believable as this guy who could pull all this stuff off, that I never had a doubt watching it that he was the secret agent and that he could do all this stuff. Peter Falk, on the other hand, walked the fence perfectly so that we, the viewers, had some doubt about his abilities in his role. So I actually think just the opposite of what you just said.
That's why we do these sessions, right? We can have differing opinions. We'll just have to disagree on this one. Again, that's the problem with the remake. We both mentioned the actors in the earlier version of the movie, and we just came up with opposite conclusions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that said, what you said about the chemistry is true. There was an even more standoffish feel to the Brooks Douglas interactions. Even when they were trying to actually like each other, it seemed a little more standoffish in the 2003 version. So I agree with that part. I think that part was pretty accurate. Now, in the original movie, the key plot point was around the treasury printing plates. In the remake, it's all about something that was stolen 20 years before. So we don't want to give it away because it doesn't become clear until a fair way along into the movie. I have to say, though, the soundtrack here is great. It starts off with the Live and Let Die theme. I mean, come on. And then we get B.J. Thomas's Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head and more. So I love the music in this movie, too. So in the 2003 version.
Yeah, and I'll give you, the soundtrack does work well in this version. I think it gives the movie a more modern feel, although some of those songs were from years ago. But
Hey,
I don't think there really was much of a soundtrack for the 1979 version. So it was a welcome addition to get the soundtrack here.
Yeah.
Now, the movies both open up with some underworld stuff happening, and then each of them cuts into a doctor's office where we meet the doctor. But for some reason, they made Albert Brooks a podiatrist instead of Sheldon, who was a dentist. I mean, why would you make that change? Right? You're crediting
well, they
Berman.
used that joke later on, though, in the movie. that he is a
Yeah,
podiatrist.
yeah, but
But
it
they
just
wrote it
was
that way.
it
Yeah.
was yeah. I just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And there was also a dinner scene in the remake, but it
Yeah.
is 100% different, has a 100% different feel. To me, it was quite a mess. I think they tried to do too many non-family things in it instead of focusing on the family members, which was what I thought made the original dining scene work. And I was
Yeah.
very, very disappointed what they did with this part of the movie. Again, if I didn't have the original to go back to, though, I might have been fine with what they did, but I couldn't watch this without thinking back to the original and going like, "Boy, you screwed that one up."
Yeah, I mean, the dinner scene in the 1979 version was much more fun to watch and more in line with the theme of the movie. It was going to be funny. Here, they went off on some deeper things. And yeah, the dinner scene is not one of the highlights of the 2003 version.
And it was one of the highlights of the 79 version.
Yeah. And then the rest of the movie is about going to France where we meet the villain Thibodeau. Now, everything is different here from the original movie. And importantly, the serpentine scene is replaced with an airplane scene that was supposed to be funny, but it isn't even close to the serpentine scene in terms of humor.
Oh, I agree with you. This was a big swing and a miss.
Yeah.
Not only the removal of the serpentine scene, but even the different villains. As I said earlier, I'm a big David Suchet fan and I liked his character.
Mhm.
But to me, Garcia was a much funnier character due to his eccentric behavior. In this movie, they just wanted you to know that Thibodeau was gay and he was coming on to Albert Brooks. The plot needs this to be funny, and it wasn't. Now, also in the original movie, the feds get onto Sheldon because of the treasury plates, what they find in the basement. In this movie, Steve puts a radioactive thing in Jerry's jacket. Again, why are you making such dramatic changes to something that works so well in the original?
Hey, they do this all the time, though. Hey, they wanted to update it so that, hey, you saw this before the movie. We want you to see something new because we want you to pay to watch this movie. So, it's all money. It's all money.
All right, so let's talk about something positive. There's a recurring fanny pack joke throughout the remake, which reminded me to our second reference now in this episode to the movie Central Intelligence. In Central
yeah.
Intelligence, CIA agent Bob Stone, played by Dwayne Johnson, always wore a fanny pack. In the 2003 version of the In-Laws, Jerry wears one, and there's a lot of comments about it. So unlike Central Intelligence, where the agent's wearing it, it's the reluctant spy who does in the In-Laws.
Yeah.
But it is good to see a nice fanny pack thing go throughout.
It's a funny bit, too. There are a few times when they seem to be calling back to the original movie, but they change things a little bit, of course. For example, there's a comment from Jerry's wife to the FBI when they come to their house where she is concerned that the FBI is there because of their tax return. In the original movie, Sheldon's wife tells them that Sheldon overpays his taxes. Again, they are both about taxes, so it's a callback. He doesn't take the deductions the accountant tells him to, she says. Why? They didn't really change it, really. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still tax returns. So
Well, no, but they changed the focus. The one made it look like he was a saint. In the remake, it's like, oh, we had a problem with our tax returns. We did something wrong. In the first movie, it's no, Sheldon's buttoned up. He doesn't take any risks. In this one, oh, we got caught with some risk we took on our tax returns. And so to me, it's like, why would you change that?
All right. There's also a line toward the end that is, those mosquitoes are bad this time of year. And I think that's supposed to be a callback to maybe the tsetse flies carrying off the babies in the dinner scene from the original movie. I don't know for sure, but yeah, there seems to be some
Yeah.
callbacks.
Yeah, and then there's a line that says, buddy, I guess this is it. We tried. And this appeared to be a callback to what President Kennedy signed on a picture that Vince had in his office wall in the original 1979 version.
Definitely a callback. Yep.
In the car chase in the 2003 version, there was a line that said, look out, there's a girl, which seemed to be a callback to a line from the original about just missing hitting a boy during a chase.
Yeah.
Again, why? I mean, you got a gender change there. Why?
Yeah, boy, girl. Yeah. Well, it's superfluous. Yeah.
Yeah.
And since this 2003 version is a spy movie, there's a list of names that has to be downloaded from a computer. What modern day spy movie wouldn't do that? And we see the race between the downloading time and versus being caught. Okay, we've seen this all the time. It is 2003, and we see a lot of that before and after. So big deal.
Yeah, is it a knock list? They don't call it a knock list. All right. Now, we told you about the Rotten Tomato score differential at the beginning of this remake discussion.
Yeah.
And some of the reasons critics had issues with the remake were mainly around three things. And the first we've already talked about, which is the chemistry between Falk and Arkin versus the chemistry that we don't think was achieved between Douglas and Brooks. Second, the script and direction from the original tended to get more praise than the remake. Nat Maudlin, which is a great name for a guy who wrote in this one, and Ed Solomon wrote the remake with Andrew Fleming as the director. And third is something I mentioned. The original was the original. It's a classic, and a lot of people, including me, aren't fans of remakes.
Yeah, the chemistry we talked about, and I'm still okay with it in both, but it was better in the first. The script, definitely more tight in the 1979 version with far more memorable lines than the 2003 version, though some of the dialogue and skits in the 2003 version made me laugh too, I have to say. So today we looked at a remake of a classic spy story, essentially two movies made from the same story. We think the original version is much better than the remake. Tom does not like the remake much, and I think it was still a fun and decent movie to be entertained by. So I'm good with it, and so good with both. Now, let us know which of these two versions of essentially the same spy movie that you liked best.
Yeah, and again, as I said at the beginning, if you only saw the 2003 version, I'd love to hear your thoughts because you might have thought of it more highly if you didn't have the 1979 version to compare it with. And that's what really was so hard for me with this movie.
Yeah. All right, that's a wrap of our decoding of the comedic spy movie, The In-Laws. This has been Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our podcast show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Please go review our show through your favorite app. You can help us out a lot by doing that. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it.